Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 13th of June 2014, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Girish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
You got my name right today?
I did, yeah, so it's not a bad start.
You're looking very purple today.
Purple, I'm happy with that. And we've also got a guest from Denmark with us, so we're really delighted to have somebody who's travelled so far to come and meet the UK Column team and to see what we're doing. And hopefully later this afternoon we'll be having a chat about what's really going on in Denmark. We'll keep you informed about that. Well, we're going to go straight into a pretty heavy news session today because it's really becoming so obvious that we have this vicious dictatorship shutting down not only the United Kingdom but also, of course, Europe and overseas. But let's get right to the heart of the matter, and we're going to bring you back on what's been happening around the UK. Now, we've got a reason for recapping on this. We have continually warned about the fact that Robert Greene, who's been campaigning for justice for Holly Greig, abuse victim Holly Greig, and Robert has also been trying to protect other children being abused. Of course, he's been imprisoned. But at the moment he's being held under house arrest in Warrington, still unaware of the charges against him. But an attempt was made by the Scottish Government to, of course, section Robert, and he was assessed by two psychiatrists at one point who surprisingly decided, as far as the government was concerned, that Robert was perfectly normal and healthy. We'll add brave to that. We reported on a mother and her daughter in the Cleveland area who reported possible paedophile activity through a local church. They were harassed, bullied, abused, knocked to the floor and gassed by the local police simply for speaking out. They were concerned about paedophiles attacking children. We gave you information about the young Oxford mother who discovered her daughter was being abused. She went to social services and within a few months had been accused of being mentally ill and was then sectioned and held in a mental institution. This is Britain, not Stalinist Russia. We talked about Emma, the young mother from Cornwall, who'd reported paedophile photographs circulating at a primary school. She was harassed and bullied by the local Devon and Cornwall police and social services, and then a couple of months ago sectioned and forcibly medicated in order to stop her speaking out. We also reported on a Devon mother who'd reported paedophile activity at her daughter's school. She arranged a meeting at the school with teachers, was surprised to find local authority, social services and mental health teams there, and ultimately she was sectioned twice. She was beaten up in the first mental institution, and we're just going to give you an update on her. The other lady was a black lady in Sheffield who discovered a paedophile ring operating around a local school, and she was harassed and bullied and threatened so severely that she ultimately suffered a stroke, was kept in hospital for a number of months and is still attempting to recover at home. But we can tell you that yesterday the Devon mother attempted to get her own medical records from a doctor's surgery in Plymouth. The surgery immediately called the police, and we were able to hear firsthand as the police attempted to accuse the mother of causing a disturbance, which of course she hadn't. They accused her of becoming aggressive and shouting, which she hadn't. But they subsequently detained her, took her to a police station where she was stripped naked by 5 female police officers and held until midnight, when she was assessed by a psychiatrist who seemed remarkably ignorant of the overall process of psychiatry in the southwest. So we're pleased to say that mother has now been released, but since she had never committed any crime and had been sectioned and detained twice on falsified medical evidence and psychiatric evidence against her, this is pretty frightening that Devon and Cornwall police were having yet another go at sectioning her, presumably to stop her talking about child abuse. Well, that brings us nicely onto the subject of Beechwood Children's Home in Nottingham. Just to recap on this, the council's paid out £250,000 to 26 victims of the crime. 2011, there were 17 named victims. Following UK column requests to Nottinghamshire Police over the last couple of days, we now know that there are some 96 victims out there. However, we asked the police what they'd actually been doing to investigate these crimes, particularly as some of the victims have been saying that youngsters were actually murdered on site. And the response we had from Nottingham Police was that they'd been trying to get hold of the detective inspector who was actually on lead on the case. They hadn't been able to do that, so they issued us the 2012 statement Nottinghamshire Police had made when asked about searches at the site. And the lady was also kind enough to say, for our background, that the police conducted overground forensic searches using specialist equipment along with dogs. They said we did not excavate. But this was the main statement. As part of an ongoing investigation into allegations of systematic child abuse relating to a former children's home, police are carrying out searches of the site. Officers will be at the former Beechwood Community House site to conduct superficial searches only. Now, this is remarkably similar, of course, to north of the border with Robert Green's case, where Grampian Police simply failed to investigate the crime around Holly Gregg and then confidently said over the following months, well, no crime's been committed. Well,
we could also say Oxford and Cherwell Valley College, of course.
We could. Well, we will. It's exactly the same with Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. Sarah Thornton, Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police, of course, in charge of the investigation that never happened. So we decided we'd challenge Nottingham Police yesterday. We sent them an email. Thank you for coming back to us, and I look forward to further information when you can. Reading your response below, I would like a reply to the following question. In view of the fact that Beechwood victims are apparently reporting the murders of children, is Nottinghamshire Police Force undertaking a murder investigation in respect of Beechwood, as well as an investigation into the wider reported sexual abuse? We'll just highlight that key thing there. So we're asking the police if, as a result of now 92 victims coming forward, and we understand many of those victims are talking of deaths at Beechwood Children's Home, is it true that Nottingham Police are actually undertaking a murder inquiry? I have my doubts. Well, there we are. That leads on nicely, really, to Robert Green. He's now been held under house arrest in Warrington, England for 24 days. He must sleep at his house and contact the police daily. He's not allowed to use the internet. This, of course, prevents him building his own defence case. Let's remember, how has this come about? Because we now have a junta controlling the law, police and prisons in Scotland. That is head of police, Mr House, Mr Salmon, of course, First Minister, and Kenny McCaskill, who is head of the legal side. Just wanted to add a bit there, Mike, actually, if you could bring that one back on screen. Now, what we'd like to point out here, of course, is that as an Englishman, Robert Green was seized by Scottish police, taken north of the border, held in prison without any charges or proper trial for 3 months and 1 week, and now he's back in under house arrest. So life getting very dangerous for English people. Let's look at what's happening around us in the press, and we're seeing a sudden flurry of pro-English literature, if you can call it that. And I was particularly taken by this dashing photograph of Prince Philip, and he was so dashing, of course, that he won the heart of the young princess. He's standing there saluting a window, which is pretty unusual, but we thought we'd fill the window on the past because we'd like to remind people of the connections between our royal family and the Nazi elite in Europe. It is, after all, in black and white.
Yes.
So, what's been happening? Well, we don't usually show this sort of material, but we thought it important to point out that Robert Murdoch, Rupert, sorry, I have to think army. Rupert Murdoch has been pouring mind-numbing dross and soft porn through the doors of 22 million British homes. Now, some of you were talking about this yesterday. We were unable to join that discussion as we hadn't seen this classic piece of
English literature.
English literature, thank you, Mike. So we thought we'd have a little look in depth. Well, of course, page 3, soft porn, because it was just pushed through your door. But actually, the truth of the matter was on the back page, where there was this gentleman looking a little bit bemused. Luckily, we can assist you with this because he was saying, I've just seen the Free Sun and I can't believe that ordinary people would read such drivel. Who would actually read such mind-numbing propaganda? Well, thank you to Mike, because Mike was able to answer his question. And here's the first person reading it. And we're going to assure viewers that this is real. This was tweeted out.
Yep.
So David Cameron here proudly showing that he's reading soft porn.
Not sure he can read.
Well, he's probably looking at the soft porn. Here we are. Pathetic people, Deputy Prime Minister, and of course, arch Europhile, one of Britain's boys, Nick Clegg MP. And hardly worth putting this gentleman up, only to say as pathetic as the rest of them, except he's also Marxist. And these people presumably have been paid to advertise Murdoch's paper.
This is the same Rupert Murdoch, of course, that has been the subject of, or caused the entire Leveson inquiry.
Yeah.
How does that work?
I think these gentlemen are working for him. That would be my guess. So let's look at this masterpiece of literature. Well, here's the front page, and we just like to point out that according to Murdoch, of course, the Queen is on a level with Mick Jagger and football stars. Seems appropriate to me. We've got the royal family, of course, mixing with the great and the good. Prince Charles, the man who runs Cornwall. Elton John, well, I'm not going to waste my time on that. And here they are, David Cameron, free publicity, Nick Clegg and Miliband. So really, I think Murdoch's summing it up. This is the state of Britain. We would guess that Mr. Murdoch is doing his best to absolutely destroy national heritage, pride and the morality of this country. But according to him, no one else on the planet comes close to our genius. Presumably he's talking about himself. And this is where it gets cynical. So a few years ago, anybody who mentioned anything to do with England was clearly a rabid right-wing racist. And now all of a sudden, as we have the drive to break Scotland away from the Union, we're suddenly getting people to think of themselves as English. I think this is massive nationwide propaganda to help the breakaway of Scotland. Open to suggestions. Now, if we've depressed you a little bit, we thought we would cheer you up because we have the solution to the Murdoch problem. And that is, if you simply go to this address, well, you can send your Sundros paper back to their own free post address there in London. So we'd like to encourage as many million people as possible to send their used soiled newspaper to Free Post, The Sun, London E98 1AX. And if you'd like to do that, you will feel better the moment it's gone in the post box. So let's come on to our politicians. They read the Free Sun. And let's come back to William Hague, because I'm delighted to say that this journalist, Mary in The Independent, has really picked up on the right question, which is what on earth is going on in the Foreign Office. It's a very polite heading. Has the Foreign Office lost its voice? What she's really saying is, what is Willie Hague doing, mixing with the great and the good in
Hollywood.
Hollywood, thank you, that's the name of it. When, of course, the reality is this, that everywhere this man and the politicians have been, we've got people brutalised, maimed and dying. So we thought we would just bring home to people the sheer callous hypocrisy of men like William Hague, the little girl on the right. I am the little girl brutalised at your hand and the hand of your Westminster colleagues in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Libya and Ukraine. And we'd like to say thanks to Mindwatch for that image, very disturbing statistics and data on deaths in Iraq and other places. What we're dealing with is a death cult, and the Catholic Church coming under attack here because the Polish Premier has been saying that doctors have got to perform abortions even against conscience. So we're seeing this same agenda being pushed right the way through the EU. And of course, as far as UK column staff are concerned, this is ultimately going to lead, unchecked at least, is going to lead to the sorts of policies that Nazi Germany was carrying out, which is disposal of the mentally and physically disabled. And of course, no child is going to be born unless that child is going to be dedicated to the state. Those of a weak disposition look away, but here she is. Hillary has been coming to the fore and giving her opinion on the possibility of Scotland becoming a vassal state within the EU. She said she would hate for Britain to lose Scotland. She told BBC Two's Newsnight she believes a yes vote would be a loss for both sides and that she's hoping it does not happen. She was also keen for Britain to remain part of the European Union. Well, we just like to say, be off, old crone, back to the blasted heath. And we suggest she just sticks to the US politics. So pretty heavy stuff as far as what's going on in Britain is concerned. This is the reality. But what we're seeing is the aggressive drive towards war and privatisation moving across the globe. Over to you, Mike.
Well, just before we move on to across the globe, somebody has just said in the chat box, very good idea, I think, send a leaflet along with the newspaper whenever you send it back to the Sun. Fantastic, even better. Send a UK column to them. Because they should be being delivered today or tomorrow, I suppose.
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay, so Abe, Japan, Japan's Prime Minister Abe on Wednesday demanded that on the floor of their parliament that they approve legislation which will reinterpret the Japanese constitution and allow Japan to go to war without having first been attacked. And this is what he's calling collective self-defense. And he's saying that he directly mentioned China and North Korea as the excuse for justifying this. And he said that Japan has a desire now to join any ally that might end up in a war in the region. Now, yesterday we were pointing out that certain elements within the British establishment were openly calling for war with China at this point. Unfortunately, I do apologise, I haven't included that today, as I said I would. I will bring that in on Monday. But the opposition leader in Japan is saying that Abe is getting drunk on his own speech and really taking a big risk for Japan's security. This, I think, this has to be seen within the context of the encirclement of China by the United States. Just as Russia is being encircled, and also in terms of Japan's own claims on the Senkaku Islands, which has caused tension between Japan and China recently. So
everywhere we go, we've seen this rhetoric for war, and
yes.
violence. Sorry.
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And of course, the BBC is pushing it as hard as they can as well. As we might expect, they're right out in front, pushing the war propaganda. So the US, as we reported a few weeks ago, has deployed several B-52s to the UK for the first time in decades. And the BBC has decided that the British public needs to know how great that is and how much safer we are as a result. So they are really pushing this sheer propaganda piece.
Well, the other point here is, Mike, and I'm continually making this, that on the world stage we've got David Cameron and William Hague in particular beating the drums for war. They want war, they want the violence, but of course, effectively, with great respect to the British Armed Forces, numbers are now so low, the power of Britain's armed forces so poor, that the reality is always that Cameron will be putting the lives of American men and women at risk in order to do his bidding. So if you're watching us from the United States, just have a think that it will be David Cameron and William Hague and Nick Clegg continually calling for these violent attacks on nation states. But whose armed forces are they going to use? They're going to use American armed forces, and it will be coffins for Americans that will be coming back from those areas. Extraordinary.
Yes, in the meantime, speaking of America, this is Russia Today highlighting that a Russian nuclear-capable bomber, several of them, were intercepted off the 50 miles off California's Pacific coast. This is according to NORAD. And you thought that was pretty close, actually?
Well, I think this is unusual from my experience. Okay, I'm getting a bit long in the tooth, but for this sort of aircraft to come down, if this report is real that we're talking about the California coast, this is the Russians really saying to the Americans, well, we're not prepared to just take all the stuff that's happening, presumably in Ukraine. They're showing that they are prepared to respond.
Indeed, but of course, right across the Middle East, and Ukraine, you mentioned Ukraine, but right across the Middle East as well, we see this continuing chaos, and in Iraq, the situation continues to deteriorate. We've now got this type of headline appearing in Western media, and actually much debate in the UK media about whether British military forces need to be sent back to Iraq to sort the problems out. But of course that isn't going to happen, because as far as the British establishment is concerned, Iraq is job done. Tony Blair, I believe, had the intention from the start to really neutralise Iraq, as it did later with Libya, by demolishing that nation and reducing it to utter chaos. That's really what they've done. Iraq is not really a risk to anybody at the moment, while they're busy in fighting. And if we look at the history of this nation, this has been our tactic the whole time, hasn't it?
Yeah.
But really, I think this is quite an interesting development, because the Dutch, the Netherlands Court of Audit, which is equivalent to the Audit Commission, I suppose, has released a report on the finances of NATO. And they had this to say. They said, the Netherlands Court of Audit has taken the initiative to present an overview of the publicly available information on NATO's finances and its results, and what is publicly known of financial flows from the member countries to NATO. The NCA audits the expenses that the Netherlands annually spends on NATO activities. We do not have a specific mandate to audit NATO, but we are involved in advising the International Board of Auditors for NATO. Together with EBAN and other supreme audit institutions of member countries, we have been concluding for several years, and this is the point, we have been concluding for several years that NATO's financial management is not in order. And this has got to be seen, I suppose, in the context of other pan-national organisations like the European Union, where we have exactly the same situation, that financial management is not in order.
Yeah, that's a beautiful phrase, isn't it? It's like fiddling, or fiddling of expenses. It's not in order.
Yeah.
So we've presumably got billions of dollars disappearing, but don't worry, it's just not in order.
Right. They went on to say, through this initiative, we aim to trigger a public discussion on NATO's performance by presenting taxpayers with a comprehensive overview of NATO's present levels, a level of transparency and public accountability. Now, here's the overall budget situation. 1.5 trillion euros is the military budget. They have a civil budget of 215 million euros, and so on. And here's Britain's contribution, a total of 531 million pounds, which I believe is about 10% of the whole defence budget. Goes to NATO. So let's just remind ourselves that it's our tax pounds and dollars and euros which are being used to fund NATO expansion. And if we leave this unchecked, well, I think NATO is fully intending to start World War III. That's certainly the intention. They're poking this big bear as hard as they possibly can at the moment. There's now noises about poking China as well. I think it's time for a tax boycott in this country until such times as the government winds its neck in.
Yeah, well, this is the key point, isn't it? We can say NATO's doing it, but I think we've got to come back to a little bit of Saul Alinsky. It's not an organisation that's doing it, it's the people behind it. So whether it's Albright or Barack Obama or Mr. Cameron, but
or Hague,
or William Hague, yeah. Yes.
Okay. Moving on then to finance. We've been talking about the housing bubble in this country for quite some time, and there's an article about this in the newspaper. But the International Monetary Fund is now saying that this housing bubble is a global housing bubble. It's interesting the language being used in the Financial Times article here, because it's all about containment. They're not talking about solving anything. They're talking about containing it. Because the intention is to allow it to continue so long as it can be contained, and they're using rhetoric like devastating housing crash. The talk of a British housing bubble has been expanded to include quite a number of other countries, including Australia, Belgium, Canada, Norway, Sweden, and others. And so they're really starting to sound alarm bells. I would just highlight again that it is my belief that this is absolutely an intentional act. Mm-hmm. They know that the housing market is not, I hate to use the word, but it's not sustainable in its present form. It is going to crash, and they intend to steal people's property, physical assets, as fast as they possibly can. And with that in mind, last night, Mark Carney was speaking at the Mansion House, and he was hinting of the carnage to come, in fact, which is rising interest rates. Now, I forgot about the caption on this guy, but we have been talking about the situation with rising interest rates for quite some time. But actually, Mark Carney was not the only person speaking at Mansion House last night, because George Osborne was also there, and he confirmed that he has plans to give Carney and the Bank of England new powers to prevent the housing market from overheating. I'm not clear what those are, because this is not like the situation in 2007, 2008, and over a ridiculous debt bubble. This is a different situation that's happening at the moment. But again, the intention: raise interest rates, and people are so overextended in terms of how much of their household income is going. They are, yes. Yeah. Yes.
But if they lose their houses, of course, there's going to be studs in the pavement, so they're not going to be sleeping in the doorways of some of the wealthy banking institutions in London. Perhaps we'll get some of those studs in Plymouth shortly.
Yes, right. New subject. Earlier on, you suggested that children were going to have to be dedicated to the state, or you would not be allowed to have children. And indeed, this seems to be heading in that direction. They're using the benefits system as the excuse, of course. But what they're saying is here, feckless parents to be stripped of benefits unless they take lessons in raising a family. So what we're talking about here is parental classes again. You get a group of people in a room, they give them a nice dose of applied psychology and NLP, and before you know it, they're bringing their children up in exactly the way the state wants them to bring them up. No sort of independent thought required here. We will tell you what to do. It's fascinating.
If you're north of the border, of course, you're going to have a dedicated social services person allocated to your child from birth. So you're going to be monitored in your parenting skills from the time your child's born.
Yes.
Frightening stuff when you put it all together. There is a solution. We'll talk about that at the end. But we thought this was just wonderful. The government has been hailing a victory in a massive fall in benefit tribunal hearings, a huge drop in the number of people appealing against benefit decisions at tribunal hearings was yesterday held a victory for the government's reform. So this was the detail. There were just 32,546 tribunal cases between January and March this year, compared to 155,000 in the same period 2013. So this is an 89% fall, apparently, in people contesting the decision to cut, denial, restrict employment support. So the government boasting about this. Disability Minister Mike Penning said fewer appeals going to tribunal is welcome. Getting more right decisions first time avoids the need for protracted tribunal appeals. What I think is going on here is that people simply haven't got the wherewithal to take themselves through these tribunal hearings. They can't afford to get legal representation with them to go through these hearings. So basically the government, with a huge baseball bat, has beaten people out of the benefit system. I do not believe this report. I think the Express here is just pushing raw government propaganda. But at the end of the day, the shot we gave there, the money is the key issue, and people's quality of life comes well down the pecking order. Can we prove this to you? Well, probably we should go to the Independent here. And this is a fascinating story. Food bank charity was threatened with closure by Ian Duncan Smith's aide. And basically this is about the Trussell Trust, which has been putting food out for people who can't feed themselves. Chris Mould, chair of the trust, told the Independent that he had been warned during a private conversation that the government might try to shut you down over the charity's public campaigning on the plight of people unable to feed themselves or their families. And Mr. Mould wouldn't reveal the identity of the person concerned, but the Independent did a bit of work and it came to the conclusion it was the Conservative MP Andrew Sellis, Parliamentary Private Secretary to Mr. Duncan Smith, the Work and Pension Secretary. However, Mr. Sellis strongly denied having been that individual. Your allegation is wholly false. I've never said that. And I actually helped to set up a Trussell Trust food bank in my constituency. So there we've got the state of the Conservative MPs. They can't actually help people out on a national level, but they can manage to set up the odd food bank or two. But if the charity speaks out and tells the truth, what are they going to do? Shut the charity down. Now, this is pretty interesting because, well, these are just a couple of the comments here. Here we are. We encourage people to go and have a look at this story because it shows the callous, brutal nature of this Conservative Lib Dem government. But let's not forget, in Alinsky style, let's look at the man. Here he is, Ian Duncan Smith. Totally all right, Jack, because, of course, he has his parliamentary salary and the benefit of a multi-million-pound farm heavily subsidised by the EU. Many people believe that this man believes poor people are just a nuisance. So a little more work and we'll have the full British dictatorship, which is going to make Nazi Germany look a holiday camp. And this is all being done very quietly, put together by people like Duncan Smith, David Cameron, Nick Clegg, and the Miliband brothers, of course, to drive it in. As the German lady told us many years ago, Mike, she said that the Nazi ideology came in drip by drip like an anaesthetic. And I couldn't think of a better analogy for what we're seeing in UK today. Well, there is some good news on the horizon because if we do the right things, we withdraw our consent, we shout, we warn people, and we take action to force the police in particular to do their jobs, we can stop what's happening. And we're pretty optimistic because looking in the future, we think this. So there we are. You're getting a glimpse of the front page of the latest UK column, The Reset. I'll just bring it back up very quickly, Mike. The Reset, a wolf in sheep's clothing. For anybody who's got any doubts about UK column's view on Reset, Reset in whatever form is part of this new single government agenda. Its aim is to dismantle the Constitution, its aim is to dismantle common law, and ultimately that will remove our rights and freedoms. So, UK column will be with us next couple of hours, hopefully, and we're going to encourage as many people as possible to get a hold of a copy. We think this edition particularly important with what it's revealing and talking about to do with the Constitution, common law, and what we need to be doing to stop what's happening in UK. Over to you, Mike.
Okay, 6 p.m. tonight, Doomwatch, Darren Diogi, and Alex says our guest is alternative philosopher Darren Diogi, whose entertaining presentation, Secrets Behind Our Language, addresses the issues around our words and their spelling. and how these have an effect on our daily lives. So that's likely to be a thought-provoking programme, and please join us at 6 p.m. live on ukcolumn.org/live.
Thanks very much for joining us. We'll see you same time on Monday. Bye-bye.